Hello, and welcome to this episode of Winged Victory with Rob and Scott, presented by the National Museum of World War II Aviation in Colorado Springs. In this episode, we'll be joined by one of our museum lead docents, Don Johnson. Don is a retired Air Force C-5 pilot, as well as a retired Delta Airlines pilot of 13 years. Don wears a lot of hats here at the museum. Along with being a docent, Don helps maintain the airplanes as well as piloting the PT-19 and the AT-6. He was also the one behind our SB2C Helldiver public presentation, From Zero to Hero, a presentation that you can currently available on the museum's website, YouTube channel for your viewing pleasure. Don sat in with Rob and myself as we talked with our guest, Matt McCauley, who was a part of a small team of teenagers that located and raised the Helldiver we have here in the museum back in the early 80s out of Lake Washington in the Seattle area. Their story is an intriguing testament to what can be accomplished with a lot of ingenuity, a never-say-die attitude, and let's face it, a little luck. So enjoy the sit-down with Matt and Don and the saga that was the raising of a Helldiver.
Today's a really special one. We've got a guest all the way out from the Pacific Northwest, Matt McCauley. We'll get into blaming him here shortly. Don Johnson, one of our lead docents in the program here, who also had a great presentation yesterday about our Helldiver, and Scott Klaers, heir to the Klaers hundreds and all-around skilled mechanic, pilot, and hopefully raconteur.
We'll see.
So welcome to Matt. You traveled the farthest. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, do you see yourself as a diver or a salver? Primarily,
I see myself more as a diver. A salver I view as somebody who's more in the actual business of recovering items of value off the bottom. A lot of times that's modern ships and things of that nature. I was more, as a young guy, and well, still am, somebody who's very passionate about history, who also enjoyed the sport of scuba diving. That allowed me to go to areas that a lot of people can't visit that are related to my interest in history. So a great example of that would be the World War II aircraft wrecks and intentionally discarded aircraft on the bottom of Lake Washington, next to Seattle, near where I live.
Yeah, and we'll ask you more about what is on the bottom, because you're talking, in my view, sunken treasure.
Hey,
but Don gave us the history of this particular aircraft, which you are intimately involved with, at least in the beginning. And Scott's one of the guys that turned wreckage into treasure, which is what they do here at Westpac. At least that's how I put it.
absolutely.
And behind us, this is not what she looked like when you first saw her.
Not even remotely. Absolutely not. What we found was a vestige of what you see sitting behind us. It was a stripped, burnt center section, absent where the wings past the fold points. There was no engine forward of the firewall. The entire tail area aft of the gunner's position was gone. No landing gear, no seats, no instruments, a little bit of the pilot's front canopy, and that was it. All the rest of the canopy stuff was gone. There were some incidental parts and pieces in the cockpit area, and that was about it.
Do you think that a lot of that stuff was pulled as salvage before? Maybe they got to set an airplane on fire with a engine that they can scavenge parts from?
Absolutely. I think that's what happened. The aircraft history card tells us that the airplane was stricken in 1945, presumably after having had a hard landing. So I often compare that to a car insurance company totaling a car. They're essentially saying, hey, this car would cost a lot more money to repair than it's even worth, so let's just scrap it. The Navy had their own version of that. So what they did after they deemed this plane not worth repairing is exactly what you described. They removed the usable components, and then ultimately the empty hulk, they used it as a fire training aid. Basically, they would throw some avgas on it, set it ablaze, and then they would time their base fire training crews how long it took them to remove an asbestos dummy from the cockpit in order to simulate a wreck on the tarmac.
Well, that's something that pilots would appreciate.
So based off of that, me being a restoration guy and in the business, I see stuff like that and I see the treasure in it.
Of course, yeah.
How did somebody that, a 19-year-old kid at the time see something like that and decide, hey, we're going to go through the effort to really bring this thing up and do something with it?
That's a great question. And I had some friends, dads that were car collectors. So I would see them going to swap meets or what have you, or out in barns or whatever in Eastern Washington, and coming back with rusted parts that didn't look like very much that they were all excited about. So even as young guys, we had the sense that if we put this in the right hands, somebody might be able to do something with it toward restoration, whether, restoring that center section itself or using the burnt parts and pieces to make patterns to make other usable pieces for the airplane. Because I had not visited your library, but in those days I thought there wasn't that much information around for restorers if they needed to make a new part. So I thought, well, if you had even an unusable part, from that you might be able to make a good one, a new one.
Exactly how we
reasoned.
Yeah.
So that was kind of our motivation. We sort of figured somebody could either use it to maybe put together a static display, and in our wildest dreams, like, dare we let ourselves imagine it ever flying? Nah, that's crazy. That could never happen.
So was it mostly that you thought that maybe you can find somebody that could actually put this thing in the air, or how much of it was just, hey, we're kids and we're going to go out and have some fun and try to do something crazy here?
No, I wanted it to fly, and at bare minimum, I wanted to see it restored. I sort of looked at it as we were just a link in a chain. I knew that. I knew what we were. We were young guys who were scuba divers. We were going to get this up. There's no way I'm going to become you guys, an aircraft restorer. That wasn't the direction I had my life planned out. I thought we could bring it up, get it to somebody that knew what they were doing, and then from there they could take it. And our little part would be, here it is, here you go, because we have some limited specialized knowledge that allows us more or less mostly to get up there on the trailer. So we knew all along that it had to go to somebody that knew what they were doing, whether a museum or a private collector or someone. And we were crazy too. We hadn't scoped the market. There was no internet in those days. You had Trade-A-Plane and then some of the, the aviation fan magazines like Warbirds and Air Classics that I used to read. And, so we had a sense of what was out there. As I recall at that time, the only flying Helldiver was a Dash 5 operated by a wing of the Confederate Air Force. Correct. That, as I recall, had a mishap like a year or so later, and for a period there were none flying. So because of the scarcity of the plane, we had a sense that somebody would want it, but we never really. We even then knew that just out in somebody's garage with dad's machining tools or something, it wasn't going to happen for us.
What was your wildest guess at how long you thought it might take somebody to get it back in the air or to static condition?
I thought it could take like an incredibly long period of time, like 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. And what did it take?
41 though.
Yeah.
We can say it took 41, but it didn't take Westpac 41.
No.
Because once the Slatterleys and Westpac got involved, the rate of restoration escalated dramatically. So it's fun to say it took 41 years, and I like saying that. But in reality, the original man that we sold it to was a really nice guy. We're still friends, named Mike Rawson. He was an individual restorer. He started out, he was working when he bought it from us, he was an AMP for Northwest Airlines. He was a lot older than us. He must have been 28 or 29 at the time. And he had a wife, he had kids, he had a day job. And so he's out working on the thing on weekends for years. And one guy with a A&P normal middle class income, it was stretching out a long time. So ultimately, after a number of decades, he came to an agreement with the Slatterleys, and the rest. Then you guys eventually got involved, and it came out here, and the magic started.
Well, and that's the testament of having somebody like Slattery family that
that
will do that investment and have that pride and want to have these things in the air to be able to put the money forward, and then find somebody like our shop or somebody else that can really dedicate the time and do it. That's what it requires for something like that, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I've sort of seen other situations where, something gets in the hand of an underfunded museum, it can inevitably sit in storage for a really long time. We raised another former Shrike SB2C-1A in 1987 from the lake. We also sold that to Mike, and then ultimately that one ended up, he made a deal giving it to the Air Force Museum, and they didn't have the resources to do much with it, so it sat in storage for a long time, and then they handed it off to the USS Midway Museum, and it's now being used as a part source for a static 5 or 4, I forget, that they're putting together right now. So that, the museum, they don't necessarily have the resources that a private individual might to really put it into high gear and make it happen. And I'm a big fan of seeing aircraft fly. I know there's a lot of debate. Should they fly or should they just be statics? And I couldn't do it this trip, but I cannot wait to bring my grandson out here to the museum in Westpac one of the next times that has a public flight, so he can stand there, he can see the engine turnover, he can see him do the prop adjustments, boom, it fires up, the exhaust starts billowing out, you're standing out there outside, and you're getting a little sense of what it might have been like to be standing on a runway or a carrier deck back in 1945. That brings history alive for him, because he's 7 years old. So for me, World War II was 20 years before I was born. Most of the elders, my grandpa's generation and great uncles, they were all involved in the war. But now that's like me looking back at, for my grandson to look at World War II is like me having looked back at guys in the Spanish-American War or something. It's, it's ancient history. So I think there's one of the things too that really encouraged me in the public flight yesterday is how many kids came up to me, teenagers and young people and moms and dads with kids that are wanting to take a picture or ask me questions about pulling it up off the bottom of the lake. And it's great seeing that engagement with history from the next generation. So because of that, I think actually flying the aircraft, drawing the public attention, does a great job of accomplishing the mission of passing this history on to subsequent generations.
Yeah, that's what we're all about.
That's why
It is. It's, I tell people we're custodians of national treasure and
stewards.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then as far as, like you said, watching the, having that debate, should they fly, should they not fly, that all changes the first time you stand underneath one of these when they're making a pass. Because then that's where they belong. They belong in the air. As beautiful as it is sitting behind us right now, it doesn't compare to what you see when it's flying by 200 knots.
You're denying the intention of the machine by not flying it.
And you just can't help but to sit there and envision, what did it sound like when there was 800 of them flying over? What was that feeling?
A vast difference between living history and static history.
Exactly.
These airplanes are machines. They're doing what they were built to do, for the most part. They're not doing everything that they were built to do.
Well, we haven't dropped any bombs yet.
No, not on purpose.
Okay.
So, there's a huge difference between living history and just seeing something in place and trying to imagine what it might have been like or what it sounded like. Here you can actually smell it. You can feel it in your chest when the engine is throbbing, and it's a vastly different experience.
Exactly. Now, okay, we've accounted for the Helldivers on the bottom, but you brought up a couple of Wildcats as well, didn't you?
Yeah, those were General Motors built versions of the Wildcat. They were not actually manufactured by Grumman. I believe the designation is FM2.
The FM1 and then the FM2.
I may have
was more numerous.
I'm drawing a little blank right now, but one or the other.
Probably FM2s.
I think you're right. I have it somewhere in my old stuff. I've been so focused on Helldiver lately, and unfortunately, in that case, those two we sold to a collector in Minnesota, and again, they were largely stripped, missing engines. Same situation, had been used as fire training. Only one of them had wings, which we were able to fold. My friend's dad had been an AMP in the Navy in the Second World War, so out on the barge when we had the stuff sitting there, we were trying to figure out how we were going to position all these hulks on the barge. And his dad's like, move, let me get in there. And so he goes into and pulls the pins out and just rolls the wings back, folds them back, and they've been in fresh water, so you can still see the grease and stuff at the hinge point or the fold point where they came back. And I was like, wow, that's still good. They just folded like it was like he was just yesterday had been doing that out at Sandpoint. He remembered where the stuff was, and it was really cool.
You didn't just pull one out individually and then take it to the shore. You were like taking them out and putting them on a barge at the same time.
Yeah. Now this one in '84 was
That was its own deal.
by itself. But then what we had figured out was that after we won the lawsuit, we didn't do anything between '84 and on planes between '84 and '85 because the lawsuit was pending. We needed to know what was going to happen because why waste your energy on planes that you're not going to be able to do anything with had the judge ruled against us. Pardon me. But okay, so '85, summer of '85, we get the green light. And by '86, we're back out at this dump site that this one had been on. So one at a time, we picked up the 4 that were left out there from 150 feet, dragged them across the lake, sat them back down in 20 feet of water, just sort of one by one. And that took a little time because we all had jobs and girlfriends and this one and that one and the other thing. And so, when we could get out and do it, we did it. And we continued to also look for others and other stuff. So that took some of our time. But by the time we had 4 lined up in shallow water, we'd reasoned that we'd found everything that was on that particular barge load. And then that time we had a barge and a crane come. We actually bartered with them. I traded them side scan sonar time for finding logs on the bottom of the lake for the lifting time. So then after we were done with that, they went out. I directed with my sonar data to pull up all the logs because that's what they did was log recovery. We're pulling up logs that have been cut down 100 years earlier, and then they turn them into paper pulp. But they're putting them to good use, though. It's fine for me. But yeah, so they put them on a barge, and then we took them to a kind of industrial site that used to exist on the lake, and set them on a trailer and took them to a storage area till the new owners come and arrange for them to go to their respective new homes. But the Wildcats went to a collector in Pennsylvania, and I've never heard anything to this day about anything being done with them. So for all I know, they're still sitting out there, and he never got to them.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
When was the last time you dove the lake to see some of these aircraft?
Well, it's funny you should ask. There's you're working on the PT-19 in there?
Correct.
There's a PT-19 that we also found as part of that barge dump that we didn't really do anything with because of its tube and the ashen wood wing roots and stuff. So we had moved it over there too, but we ended up leaving it on the bottom because this big heavy crane, we thought to lift it. It was very delicate.
Yeah.
So it didn't come up because I sort of misspoke. I forgot to mention that one. So we left that one in 20 feet of water. So what I do, this is so corny, but this is what I do. So Alan from Westpac, when I was here, gave me this really cool detail of Curtiss Helldiver, just said Helldiver decal. That was an old logo he found in one of his books or something. So I scanned that and I put it over a diver's flag, and then I had them made into patches. So I came up with this little shtick where you get to call yourself a Helldiver if you have salvaged 5 or more World War II vintage combat aircraft out of Lake Washington, or if you were 18 or younger, you have made a dive on a World War II combat aircraft or training aircraft with someone who has salvaged 5 aircraft or more. So in other words, every time I take a teenager out diving on that PT-19, we have a little ceremony where I give them the coveted Helldiver patch, because you get it, right. Helldiver, it's the Helldiver plane over the Helldiver flag. But they get that, and they get to put it on their dive jacket, and they get to be a member of this exclusive club. So the youngest is 12, and the oldest is 18. They got the patches, so it's kind of cheesy. But I now use that for just a dive site for them to go. It's shallow water, so a beginning diver can do it. Yeah. Give them a taste for wreck diving, give them a taste for what it's like to look at historic aircraft on the bottom, to try to give them a little incentive. So it's now a training process.
To give a 12-year-old incentive is anything but cheesy. But you're reasonably acquainted with the PT-19 work. What do you think? Would it stand the...
I'm surprised there's still anything out there.
Before you answer, let me send you some pictures.
Yeah, it's the PTs are there's a lot of them above water.
Yeah, and
there's not a huge market for them, so it's a question. You could probably find a buyer. It's a question of how much it would cost, and
as you say, there are a lot of them.
Well, I'm just wondering how much that would rip apart or whatever, getting it out of the water, but. Because it's so much wood.
It's not
well, but the tube steel is...
And it's corroded. It's pretty corroded because it's also now in 20 feet of water, so light's getting to it.
Yeah.
The firewall, I let one kid do a salvage practice. The firewall was just laying there loose. So I let him hook a lift bag, what's called a lift bag, up to it and fill it up. So he had the practice of salvaging a part of a World War II aircraft. And we examined the firewall. I have pictures of that. And there are holes in it. He said, are those machine gun holes? And I looked at the holes, and I like to shoot guns as a hobby, so I'm familiar with what it looks like a bullet impact. And usually, if you shoot something like aluminum, it's sort of a multiple shreds behind it. I'm not sure the language to use, but there's like a lot of like a little claw of shredded metal behind it. Whereas this was like a single shred that sort of just had kind of a curlicue in the back, and it was a sort of a hole shape that made me think maybe somebody had taken a fire axe to it, because there's a bunch of these holes out there. I'll send you pictures of that, and you guys can tell me what you think. I didn't think it was bullet holes, because with a bullet hole, it's you can tell.
If you're being shot at in a trainer, it's already a really, really bad day.
That's a problem there.
Well, and given the fact that most of them were fire department trainers, that stands to reason.
That was a fire axe.
But my next question would be, since 1987, you said the laws have changed. Would it even be possible to recover the PT at this point?
It would be possible if you did it in conjunction with a museum. So if we said the museum is going to be the owner, they could make an arrangement with the state of Washington, which wouldn't care and wouldn't want money. They just would want to make sure it was going for a public good. And we could work within, that could happen within the law. However, to go to a private collector, they would not allow that. So they have made it more complicated to do. So doing what we did, we brought them up and sold them to private collectors, because that's who was interested in them.
Sure.
We didn't have any museums saying, yeah, we want your Helldiver because we want to spend however, gosh, only knows how much money, to complete it. So that, not that anybody else has found any hulks out there. Most of the planes left on the bottom that anybody is talking about are intact planes that were operational losses that remain the property of the Navy.
Okay. So what's the crown jewel that you have out there that you've seen personally, put eyes on?
You'd have to tell me, Scott, because you know more about the values.
For your own personal.
My favorite is the PB4Y2 Privateer. It's the consolidated naval variant of the B-24. It's got, and now, this is another one I didn't know that well. When I first found it on the bottom back in '83, and I'm looking at the front of it, we hit it up around the nose, and I thought, that's an interesting nose turret. I've never seen that before, because it has that Urco nose turret that, I mean, it's common to you, but just the average kid that built, 1/32 scale Revell models and hung them from his ceiling. What's that? And then I started looking at it, I was like, that looks like a B-24. Oh, cool, we found a B-24. Why is there a B-24 in the lake? And I kept swimming toward the tail. It's like, wait a minute, why does this B-24 have a B-17 tail? I don't know what I found here. And then I'm swimming back, and I look down on the side, but it's got PBY gun blisters with guns on it. Why are there PBY blisters in a B-17 tail on a B-24? And then later I did some research and found out, oh, welcome to the PB4Y2 Privateer. So that's a really cool plane. The two inboard engines are missing. The Navy yanked those off when they tried to recover it on the surface, back when it went down into the lake in 1950. Thankfully, all the crew made it out. Everybody was fine. They towed it a certain distance, and then the engines tore off and it sank. And that's where it remains today. It's become a popular dive site now with the advent of GPS, where other tech divers can go to it. And as a matter of fact, some of the guys have stretched lines from the shore across the bottom so they can take their scooters and go scooting out from shore. We used to only be able to dive it by boat. They scoot out to the plane, they do their dive, and then they scoot back and do their decompression stops. So it's become a little... And sadly, there was a diver that lost his life diving on it last year, too. So there's arguments to be made that it could be a good idea to recover these planes because they're sort of an attractive nuisance.
Exactly.
On the other hand, you'd have to find a museum that was interested in devoting resources, or a collector to sponsor for a museum, resources for a PB4Y2 Privateer. Within my lifetime, an outfit called Harkins and Powers up in Idaho, Wyoming, Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon would use those to drop fire retardant. So I actually remember seeing those flying like in the 70s and 80s. They used Avengers too.
Sure.
That is
as a kid, I saw B-17s, all these old warbirds dropping what we called borate in those days. But given the dearth of PB-4Ys, I would think that would be the crown jewel.
We would think so.
And there's also a PV2 harpoon on the bottom out there that was intact. And unfortunately, that one was about a 50-degree angle. The cockpit and engines are at the mud in 150 feet. The tail's up around 100. And so that still had, the dorsal turret, and, you got this twin boom tail, and it is a 2 because I looked at the stabilizers, and it's not the one where the horizontal stabilizer sticks out a little bit. It's flush on the vertical stabilizer. So it's definitely a PV2, and it's the navy blue color and everything. But unfortunately, what's happened is it's the tail section has since fallen off. And I don't think it was damaged by anything, like an anchor or anything like that. It seems more like just the oxidation and corrosion over time in the water, caused some fasteners to give way. And you got gravity working against it for 80 years.
Well, and that's the real argument with getting all these things out of the water. Right. That they're not going to be there forever.
Right. They're falling apart.
They're falling apart. So either you're going to just leave them and let them turn to dust, or we're going to do something about them now.
Well, it is a question of resources. It's a question of resources.
Yeah.
Before why this would be tremendous amount of money to restore, especially to flying condition.
Yeah.
So
it's a massive airplane.
You're ruling out a lot of museums if you're talking about restoring to flying condition.
Well, you're not.
That's going to fall on a private collector.
Yeah, and I don't think that a lot of museums that's what they're going to be doing with this.
No.
I mean, I've been to the Pensacola Museum, and they actually just have dioramas of pulled out airplanes, and they as is,
which would be cool.
And they make dioramas out of it because they don't have the resources to build it.
Yeah.
So
that's
maybe that's what starts happening with some of these museums.
It would be nice one way or the other, whether it's me or somebody else, to pull these out, though, because, that a few of us that understand tech diving can go down and look at them, or people can watch videos from an ROV, watch videos underwater. It's not the same as coming to a place where you can see it, be it in diorama, be it restored as a static, or, in a perfect world flying. They're not doing anybody any good on the bottom.
No, they're not.
Speaking of tech diving, didn't you have to bootleg a copy of dive tables back in your younger days?
Yeah. The certification organizations pretty much limit recreational diving to 130 feet. In those days, there was no tech diving as a branch of recreational scuba diving. So you went from recreational diving to kind of the commercial and Navy world. And the Navy had done a lot of decompression work with scuba gear.
Sure.
And had published decompression tables and other procedures for doing in-water decompression scuba. So that, there was no internet in those days, but there was mail order copy of Navy dive manuals, and that's what I got, and sort of started learning and exceeding the 130-foot limit that I had learned as a PADI. That was the certification organization, PADI. I got my dive master certification when I was only 16. So that's one below instructor. I didn't want to go into instructing, but I was a well-trained recreational diver. So then I started doing self-study to learn the Navy techniques on scuba, and we gradually started working our way deeper and deeper. The deepest I ever went on the lake on scuba was 200 feet, and did it safely. Everything was fine. So by the time we started diving on these targets, we already had the procedures down to do it safely and knock wood. Nobody got hurt. And I was enough of a geek because of my dive master training that, I had a clipboard and everybody had to listen to me. I was in charge, darn it, this kind of thing. And they did. And nobody wanted to get hurt. We wanted to do it safely and make it home and do all of that. But that did aid in what we were doing. If we were just trying to figure it out on our own, somebody probably would have had a real problem. And I was really complimented at our trial in 85 because one of our witnesses was a Navy diver extraordinaire from World War II named Robert Sheets, who by the time he retired in the 60s had been involved in what was called Sea Lab. For any of the old timers that remember Sea Lab happening. It was a really cool manned underwater habitat program that the Navy had for a while. But he was involved in that. He, as a POW by the Japanese, was doing commercial diving to recover treasure from Manila Bay. And then he was sabotaging the Japanese efforts as he was supposedly helping them. He ultimately escaped. Real wild story.
That's a story.
He was quite a guy. but he reviewed all of our dive logs and everything else. And he was asked by one of our attorneys, Colonel Myers, his assessment of our execution of operations. He said too, he looked right at the judge and said, I was actually really impressed. And he went through and gave the reasons, and he had the logbooks, and he explained in a technical way why he thought this was conducted in a professional manner. And that was relevant to the case because we had a counterclaim on admiralty, and part of the award stemmed on the level of professionalism exhibited in order to recover the item in question. Sure. So it wasn't just an ego thing. He was honestly assessing how we had done it. So that was a huge compliment. I was really happy to have heard him say.
So you're not a couple of bootleg kids going down there just willy-nilly, and to have a master diver give you that kind of prop is priceless.
Yeah, that made me pretty happy to hear. But again, I'm doing this stuff at 19 years old, and if we flip it around and we look at the stories here in the museum of these aircraft, look what these guys were doing at 18, 19 years old during the Second World War. We've kind of gotten to a place, I think, in our society where we infantilize a lot, and it didn't used to be that way.
No.
Even in my time in the 80s. I mean, you're 18 years old. I mean, it doesn't mean my parents cut me off or anything, but it's like, okay, you're off and going now. You hope these skills we taught you are paying off. And that was certainly the case in the war. Look, even in Vietnam, my uncle went into the army. He was an armor in Vietnam, 68, 69. He went in when he was 18 years old. He enlisted, and he was in an M48 tank. He was involved in the battle at Hue City, the only armor battle in Vietnam. And he's a teenager, and that's who fights wars and does these things.
The Army was taking warrant officer candidates in those days at 19, 20, and a high school diploma. And you could wind up in a Huey in combat well within a year of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were doing incredible things when you read those stories or listen to those oral histories.
Been privileged to know some of those guys.
So I think nowadays we look back and say, oh yeah, here a teenager doing this. But teenagers can really accomplish a lot of things when given the opportunity and do it well.
Sure. And to be able to do that and pass this on, to a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old, get that fire. We saw it yesterday. You saw it with the kids on the ramp, and giving them that experience, that little bit of insight into what a 20 or 21-year-old would have done in those two places.
And they got to see the pictures of you when you were that old in your dive suits.
Yeah.
Doing this heroic stuff.
Well, it's important that we inspire the next generations to, first of all, preserve the treasure, and the very first part of that is to appreciate it.
It's one thing to inspire, but it's another thing to give them an avenue to actually be able to explore that and to feed into that. And that's kind of what the museum here does on a lot of basis. But I think if we had more of that in the world, people like you taking young people out and teaching them the dive part and actually getting them hands-on, because that brings it up.
Oh, yeah.
And that fires it, lights it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was really gratified when the event yesterday that there were so many kids and families here. A lot of these history type things that I'm involved in, or especially a lot of things related to like reenactments, it's a bunch of old guys that are just old guys sitting around, and it's fun and we all like it and everything. But having that mix, and you get on in years, you become a grandfather, you start thinking about legacy and the next generations, and it feels really good to say, okay, there's some real hope here. Look at all these people having a good time. Look at all these young families here, or families with teenagers. That was so gratifying that so many people showed up for that. And I've seen that in some of the pictures of some of your past events. That seems to be a theme here. Something about this place really attracts people of all ages, which is just fantastic.
It's a family event.
Yeah.
Well, I've been privileged to work on our simulator, and you get a 10-year-old in that cockpit flying a Navy biplane, and the spark happens.
So this has been such a big part of your life for so long. Does it feel like there was kind of a chapter closed yesterday?
In a good way.
Yeah.
In a good way. A feeling of satisfaction, like when you finally not that I accomplished it, but it's a
part of
sense of
it's your
accomplishment.
story. You started that story.
It finally happened again. You know, what you guys did is just utterly amazing to me. But there's immense satisfaction in seeing the fruits of your labor here. Absolutely. And it's like a major bucket list kind of thing. Like, wow, this finally got done. You know, even if nothing ever happens with the others, I don't think it probably will, frankly. This one made it. And if anybody ever wants to see an SB2C-1A fly, this is the one and only chance that they have to do that.
Well, what I feel is amazing about that is your guys' first project as well. So it's almost like a complete full circle for you.
Yeah.
And like I said, we wouldn't be here right now if you guys hadn't embarked on that
chain of events.
And you had started that, that
had
book.
the Navy prevailed in court.
Oh yeah. Had the Navy
prevailed
in court, I have every reason to believe that thing would still be sitting as it was, could have been scrapped. I mean, they don't have the best record on stuff like that. I mean, God bless our fighting Navy. I mean that with sincerity. But, on the other side of things, there are a lot of stories of Helldiver hulks that, end up getting run through, scrapping or what have you.
I noticed you said fighting Navy.
Yes. I was about to comment on that. It wasn't the fighting Navy that was fighting.
They didn't sue me. They were on our side. As a matter of fact, all of our attorneys had been prior military, Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. So they were all sea services. And Colonel Myers was a World War II veteran. Russ Austin was Korean War. Henry Haugen was World War II. Well, actually, Colonel Myers was World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He was battalion commander at Quai Son, Vietnam, at the end of the siege. He relieved Colonel Loudons, who was there through the vast majority of the siege, but he was absolutely a part of it before he went on and became a lawyer and took on pro bono cases for crazy teenage divers. So we had a lot of support from, even though we were theoretically being sued by the Navy. In fact, the veteran community, the active duty military, they're all behind us in the Seattle area.
Well, because combat marks people, whether at 19 or later. It gives them a perspective of what's really important. And to have those guys on your side meant you were doing right. It's not a question of who am I annoying, because I'm going to annoy somebody.
Of course.
But am I going to annoy the good guys or the other guys?
Yeah. We had the right people on our side, ethically, in my mind. And I'll tell you the other thing that I've mentioned is a lot of Helldiver veterans would read about or hear about it in the news, and they kind of tentatively come by my house when the plane was frozen by federal injunction in my driveway. So every now and then I'd look out the window and, see an older guy just kind of at the edge of the driveway, just kind of looking over, being respectful of the property line and this and that. So I'd always set my beer down, walk outside, and, hello, sir, you want to come take a look? Come on in, and I'd invite them in, and they'd look around, and a lot of times they say, I flew one of these, or I was in the back seat of one of these in the war, and share stuff with me, or maybe just look at it silently and just look around. And at the time, they were like 50s and 60s age, seemed kind of oldish to me because I was 19 or 20. But these were guys, the war was only 40 years prior. So they're looking at it and touching it and everything. And to them, it stopped being a burnt hulk. They were seeing the plane that they remembered that they had flown when they were young. And some of them, the stories would start, we used to do this, or we used to do that, or this damn thing over here, that used to make me so mad. I'd always bump my knee on that right there. These kind of little things that a person that's been there can remember. I had one guy in particular that always stands out in my mind. He really got warmed up. We talked for about 45 minutes. And when he got back in the car, his daughter had driven. And she pulled up a little ways, and then she got out. She'd just been sitting there reading a book while he and I were talking. And then she got out and she ran over and she said, I have never seen Dad talk about the war, ever. My whole life, he's never talked about the war. I don't know what happened, but I've just never seen that. And I was just like, wow, that made me really happy. But it was the plane that brought that back for him.
Especially with that generation, the ones who talk probably weren't there. The ones who were, they were quiet until they've got a trusted agent or an impetus to actually release those tales. And to be able to preserve those tales is something we got to do. I just missed out on interviewing a 102-year-old Hellcat pilot,
Oh boy.
and it was just heartbreaking. We missed him going into hospice by 3 days.
Oh,
He was
it's a
the
shame.
last combat pilot that I know of that is within reach. We had him here in September at a fly day. We flew him in the PBY,
Oh,
and that was just golden. But I just missed him.
yeah. I've often regretted that I didn't have a cassette tape recorder
Yeah.
sitting by the door. But I was dumb. I didn't even think about stuff like that in those days. And now, had I said, hey, just a minute, sir, let me go grab a tape recorder.
Yeah.
How easy would that have been to have done? I'm sitting here listening to tapes of my stupid music. I could have had a blank one that I listened to this guy, but I didn't think of it at the time. You can't go back and change it. But at least I remember something. I still remember he was on the Bunker Hill. He was on the aircraft carriers of Bunker Hill.
Yeah.
So
Could have been
So,
17.
yeah, I don't remember, but that would make sense.
Could have been.
So what's next for Matt McCauley?
Well, I keep diving in the lake and dinking around out there. Maybe things will change and we'll be able to do something with the intact airplanes. There are two Grumman Avengers that were in crashes that are still on the bottom in deep water. There's a Wildcat that was in a collision with one of the Avengers that's also in deep water out there. There's a Martin PBM-5 Mariner that the Navy attempted to recover back in the early 90s unsuccessfully. They ended up tearing the tail off. And so that plane is still down there in 70 feet, upside down in the mud. There's a trainer, which is a Vultee BT-13 fabric and wood trainer laying on its back. And the PB-2, the PB-4Y2 that I already mentioned. So those are the ones that we still know about. The technology of side scan sonar has gotten a lot better. So I think if there's anything left hiding out in the lake that I haven't mentioned, could be, not super likely, but we'll keep beating the bush out there and see what we can turn up. Doesn't mean there isn't another barge load or two of hulks that somebody has missed, which would be a lot of fun to find at this state of the game as well.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming out.
My
You
pleasure.
added so much to an already excellent presentation. Don does some of the best fly days I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
And Scott, Don, last questions. I think yours was a good one, Scott. What's next? But
Appreciate that.
last
Rob.
opportunity.
No, thanks for stopping by.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for all your hospitality.
No worries.
Don really has showed us a great time since we've been out here.
Yeah.
He's known for a good time.
Well, and it's really nice that we get to sit down and talk to you, and because I hear your story on a daily basis multiple times as they bring tours over here, and I know what's right and what's wrong with some of those stories, but to actually hear from you and have you be a
The
part of
horse's
this
mouth, yeah.
whole thing,
Yep.
Oh, my
it's been
pleasure.
fantastic.
And I'm a huge fan of Westpac, what you and your dad and all your team are doing here. You're providing incredible service to history and our culture and everything else. So I just think it's absolutely terrific.
Well, thank you.
Super.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed hearing some of Matt's story and would like to hear a more in-depth interview with Matt and his partner in raising the Helldiver, Jeff Hummel, you can head over to our YouTube page at National WWII Aviation and find the SB2C Helldiver documentary, a long-awaited reunion. I mean, if you're into World War II aviation history, I guarantee you will love this doc. I would like to thank Matt McCauley and Don Johnson for taking the time to sit down with us and tell their story from a first-hand perspective. And now for a few things going on at the museum in the coming months. We have an upcoming Fly Day presentation on August 16th, Ground Attack Warriors, by docent Fred Betcher, and featuring our P-47 Thunderbolt. The presentation starts at 9 a.m. with a demonstration flight of the P-47 by pilot Alan Wojak to follow. All of this for just the normal price of admission. You really can't beat that. Find all of our events as well as all of our links with social media, including our link to our YouTube channel where you can watch these Winged Victory podcasts on our museum website, WWII-aviation.org. Please make sure to follow or subscribe to our YouTube page or whatever podcast service you have found us on. We have some exciting things coming up, and I promise we only get better at this. Maybe. And oh yeah, check us out on TripAdvisor, where the museum is sitting at number 8 in the country for things to do, up from number 11 last year. We're coming for you, NASA. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram at SCOTTKLAERS, or you can just visit the museum and say hi to me in person. You can find my partner on, well, these podcasts, as he is yet to be convinced to join the social media revolution. It'll happen, I promise. Our producer and editor, William Stevenson, can be found at @lilboots, LILBOOTS _2 of 4 on Instagram, with links to his store on his site. So for my partner, Rob Gale, our producer, William Stevenson, and myself, Scott Klaers, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Winged Victory with Rob and Scott. Stay safe out there.